welcome everybody to this particular session around cybersecurity threats affecting you and your clients. Looking forward to a really great conversation today, and I want to emphasize conversation as if there are questions or perspectives, please don't hesitate to provide them on up in the chat. And really looking forward to the chance to have this conversation. I wanted to present a quick agenda, kind of who am I, what's my role? We're going to talk about that briefly. And then I really want to dive right on in as quickly as possible into three key areas. And what is happening to business? And as you see, I emphasize small business here in parentheses, but I think that the critical thing here is that this is happening to all sizes of businesses, what we're going to talk about today. But in particular, we're going to focus in on small businesses. And then I want to make certain that I'm providing over to everybody a perspective of kind of the who and why. Who's doing this? Why are they doing it? Let's better understand who and why they're doing it. And then what sort of trends are we seeing from a cybersecurity perspective that may have an impact on you and your business going forward? And then finally, really, I wanted to make certain we were providing tangible, pragmatic perspectives around what you can do to help reduce your organization's risk, as well as taking these concepts forward to your partners and your clients to help them reduce their respective risks. Before we do that, though, I want to make certain I have one shameless plug, and that is, being a part of Boise State. I want to make certain that everybody here also understood that Boise State's a key leader and growing leader in the cybersecurity space. And one of the things that we have innovated around is the creation of a Cyber for All online certificate. It's a very quick 4-course, 12 credit hour certificate that builds upon what I'm going to talk about today and really provides some depth and understanding of what cybersecurity is about and what some of the challenges are, what some of the threats are, and how, again, going deeper into some of the recommendations. And the second thing I want to make certain of was that we capture so that I can appropriately help with the right kind of messaging, the right kind of information to you all. Kat here, my assistant, is putting up some polls. Thank you so much, Kat. Really do appreciate your help. And I'd love for everybody, if you could, to take a few minutes, take a minute or so at most, and help me understand what your role is in your company and what size of business that you happen to have. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing those details. And looks like terrific.
Yep. The poll should be up and you will get results in real time as well.
And the other thing that I was going to recommend, if you could, there are a couple of slides, like any good IT presentation, any good technology presentation, there are typically fonts that are a little bit smaller. So if you haven't had a chance to do so before in the conference and the skill builder session, if you want to double click and maximize the video of the slides, that would probably be helpful. So I think we got some really good results here. Thank you. I really do appreciate it. So as you answer these polls, you see what the answers are. So across the rest of the audience, and I'm going to make certain that as we're thinking about and talking about the various recommendations and threats to organizations, that I tailor this to the sizes of company as well as to the specific roles. So thank you. Let me move on. While we're getting right on into some of the key agenda items, I'm going to quickly go through these just to give you some perspective of who I am. I like to sum up my career with 3 key loves besides my family. They're my first love. But I have 3 key loves in my life. The first is cybersecurity. I've been doing it as a career for over 30 years. The second is building businesses. So over the course of my 30-year career, I have had the honor of building out terrific teams of people 5 different times, bootstrapping all of those and growing them to various sizes and exiting, and then moving on to the next set of opportunities. In my last endeavor out of Phoenix, Arizona, I had the opportunity to build an organization that became one of Arizona's largest, if not the region's largest, cybersecurity company, and achieved a lot of growth in my third area, my third love, and that is helping organizations, helping universities and colleges build out pathways for cybersecurity professionals. And so that's what's led me to Boise State. And I really am extremely happy to be here. Just recently started with Boise State, actually on a full-time basis in July. And my wife and our children moved on up to Boise, and we've been loving it there. So the other thing that I want to make certain you were aware of is that Boise State is, again, growing leader in the cybersecurity space. The Institute for Pervasive Cybersecurity, which I happen to run, was founded in 2020, and it was hired. I came on board on a part-time basis in March. We really have a key vision, very clear vision, and very clear mission in what we're doing. And the vision really comes down to increasing and producing a cyber-ready workforce that helps to reduce risks to people, businesses, the state of Idaho, and most importantly, across the country. And the mission is very, very simple. It's by working with our secondary education partners, our returning learners, our community college, and the other universities around Idaho. It's to build pathways where industry can see Idaho as a strong cyber-ready workforce state, and ultimately, through all of those efforts, establish Boise State on a national stage as a national leader around cybersecurity research. We have a couple of key areas of focus. Key ones that are really moving forward are research and partnership and workforce development. Those are really the first two pillars. And we have others that are moving forward around how we work and how we collaborate and cooperate with the state and other universities and community colleges around the state. Before I go too much further, I wanted to also establish a few ground rules for the presentation. Excuse me. Let me grab some water here. My ultimate goal of this session is to make certain that I'm informing and helping you as you're growing or building your business, and also to help and inform you of how what some of the threats are, what some of the key issues happen to be facing businesses, and also allow you to be able to take that information on out to, again, your clients, your partners, and others around your community. The other thing that I would emphasize is that there are no silver bullets in cybersecurity. One of the interesting aspects is that cybersecurity is all about trying to ensure that we're protecting data, we're protecting physical systems, and we're protecting people ultimately. And the challenge, of course, is that ultimately there is no singular thing that's going to provide 100% security. Instead, we have to realize that there are degrees of risk, and that there are, no matter what sort of technology or what sort of things are tried to be sold to your organization, there is no one singular thing that can actually take care of all your cybersecurity risks. Instead, it is a defense in depth. So it starts with key technology, but also incorporates people and incorporates process, as we'll talk about. The other thing I would say is that as you're thinking about cybersecurity and how to improve and how to mature cybersecurity within your organization, realize that one of the key issues is that change is difficult. No matter what, at the core, bringing about any type of institutional or cultural or organizational change can be difficult. And that includes making changes to the maturity and the overall capabilities of your cybersecurity environment. The other thing I would want to say is that while cybersecurity is extremely pervasive, and it impacts everybody, my focus of this particular talk is to hone in on business issues, business risks, and business trends. I'm not going to be necessarily talking about privacy or identity theft on an individual basis. We'll be talking about it on a larger scale basis. And then the final element is that I'm no politics in this. Irrespective of where you sit on the political spectrum, ultimately cybersecurity has an impact on you. in some way, shape, and form. I do use a couple of terms through here just to make it easier and for purposes of time. MLE, when you hear me say MLE, I'm talking about medium to large enterprises, and SMB is small to medium business. I don't try to provide any further clarification around that because there really isn't one, depending upon who you talk with and which source you go to. Small business could be $25 million in size. It could be $250 million in size. So I leave it to you. You know probably best which size organization you happen to have and what the level of maturity is within your organization. But I will be using these terms so that you know what they represent. Kind of starting off and driving right into the core of part of our issue is what's happening to businesses, what's happening to small businesses. And when I think about 2020 in particular, I hope that this word cloud helps to kind of provide a perspective, and hopefully you all agree with this perspective, that 2020, if I were to sum it up, it's all about stress. It's business stress. It's making certain that your employees are taken care of, make certain that your customers are taken care of, and ultimately for many SMBs, many small businesses, it's about survival, and even many medium to large enterprises, it's about survival. And the stress associated with that. People are feeling overworked. There are so many different problems associated with what's going on around the pandemic and the impacts to our businesses that it just, again, provides more and more stress. I'm going to emphasize that there are 4 other areas that we're going to talk through through this presentation that will probably add to your stress. I hate to say it that way, but I'm always very transparent in my approach. It's going to add to your stress, but my goal here and the objective of this is to help educate and provide recommendations. And those recommendations should help alleviate the stress that we're going to talk about at the beginning. And some of that stress is going to result in helping provide awareness and understanding about what sort of statistics, what are we seeing happening in the marketplace? And I'm going to be pulling statistics from about 2017 to 2019. 2020 statistics are still being developed. And so I prefer to use 2019 pre-pandemic kinds of statistics as we're talking through, but just understand that irrespective, 2020 changes and only increases the amount of potential cybersecurity stress to your organizations. It doesn't alleviate. Part of the reason for that is the next item that we'll talk about, which is remote workers. The big challenge for many organizations in 2020 as the pandemic began to hit is the need to move your workforce from a on-site on-campus organization to one that you have remote workers enabled. And that transformation of IT systems and the transformation of security certainly has an impact. And we'll talk about some of the challenges and some of the interesting outcomes that we're seeing that are being captured through the pandemic efforts and through the pandemic responses of your organizations. The other element that I want to touch on today is what I call the data supply chain. Many organizations that deal in a traditional brick and mortar or even an e-commerce basis, where things are bought and sold, those atoms, as you're buying and selling atoms across the internet or with your suppliers, there's also the data that goes along with that. And the data that you're collecting about your customers, your suppliers, and all of that presents its own set of risks. And we'll get into some of the key elements of what the data supply chain looks like and why it's important to, why it's so different than and important to understand the risks associated with it, different than a physical supply chain. And then finally, I want to talk in this particular section about some of the key threats to organizations. We'll deep dive into some of those, really just the top 3, and kind of cover those in a fashion to help you understand not only the how, but more importantly, the why. We're going to set ourselves up in this particular session to talk then about the next section, which is the who and the why they are doing this. But we're going to get into some of the monetary numbers and help you understand the actual reasons people, bad people are doing this to organizations around the world. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about what's going on. And again, these numbers are from pre-pandemic, 2019 to back to 2017, and to give you some trending understanding. I started off by looking at, when you divide up small businesses and everybody else, the realization is that 50% of our workforce across the country is specifically dedicated to supporting and working with and working for small businesses. So 50% of the US workforce works for what's defined as a small business. Of those small businesses, 50% of those typically have at least 1,000 pieces of information that's unprotected, sensitive data. Those could be everything from credit card information that may be unprotected to customer records, addresses, birth dates, names, both of your employees, as well as your customers, your suppliers. But that level of unprotected data is a key issue and a key item associated to what the bad guys are looking for and what they're stealing from organizations around the country. This is an interesting statistic. 40% of all cyber attacks are against small businesses. In my 30-year career, I can assure you that through my career, I have heard continuously from small businesses, from SMBs, that the bad people out there aren't looking to attack me. I'm too small. The harsh reality, though, is that since 2017, the number of small businesses that have been impacted significantly continues to grow. And if I were to put a forward guess to what 2020 statistics will look like, is that this number will increase dramatically from 40% to well beyond 40%. Next item is 61% of businesses they're suffering a breach, had less than 1,000 employees. So again, if you draw a dividing line, however you wish to, if your organization has 500 employees and you consider yourself a medium-sized organization, that's perfectly fine. But still, I think that there's a wide range of I would say SMBs to MLEs, those medium to large enterprises or small to medium businesses that are, again, being impacted. And when they do have a breach, this stat shows that organizations, the size of Microsoft, let's say, or the size of Walmart, while they're being targeted, the reality is that much smaller organizations are being targeted and being breached. I think this is an important statistic to keep in mind, is that while we're going to talk about some of the top threats, I'm going to provide out in our recommendations, I'll provide out some key monikers and mnemonics for you to keep in mind that will I hope that will help you go back to your organizations and bring about a different level of maturity or an improved maturity to some of your cybersecurity stances. Keep in mind that attackers are not necessarily always using the most likely approach. They may not necessarily always be using email, and we'll get into that. The predominant avenue is certainly email, but 75% of our websites around the country have unpatched vulnerabilities, and those unpatched vulnerabilities are ways that attackers are leveraging, and we'll get into some of the trends, but they're leveraging and then essentially brand jacking, as we'll see as we talk about some of the what's next, the trends that are happening in the cybersecurity space. They're actually brand jacking your brand and leveraging the trust that you've built with that brand to their advantage. Irrespective, though, as I just said, irrespective of websites being unpatched, 92% of malware infections are email driven. So email continues to be the major source of entry by the criminal organizations that are attacking small businesses and medium businesses. 92% of those avenues come through email in some form or fashion. And I want to assure, we'll talk about this in a bit, but I'm going to predicate the one of the topics we'll talk to is to say, this isn't attacks of this nature, and the dollars associated with them are not being done necessarily by individuals. These are actual criminal syndicates, organized criminal organizations that are, as we'll see, are made up to look like and act like a business. And in doing so, their business is breaking into yours, stealing your data, and then holding it hostage. The other key thing that I want to make certain with this statistic I'm refuting is the common misconception in the marketplace that all of these attacks are occurring from somewhere else. They're occurring overseas. The harsh reality is that the attackers are here just as much as they are overseas. In fact, the majority, as you see, 85% of those are within the same country. So the attackers are here. They're targeting US-based companies, and they may have help, as we'll talk about in a bit. They may have help from overseas, but the primary actors are all within the US. The other element, over a 30-year career, I've seen this number change over time. Traditionally, it had been 50% of attacks were coming outside organizations and 50% were coming inside organizations. And we have seen that shift over time to 70% of attacks are coming from outside and 30% are coming from inside. And these are the most, as I said, the 2019 kinds of stats. It hasn't fluctuated much beyond that. Typically it's 50-50, but 70-30 actually shows that some of the elements and some of the programs that have been put in place and some of the maturity models that we'll talk about actually are helping, and they're forcing people to be aware of and of what to do and what not to do, and forcing outside attackers to take a higher predominance of the avenues of attack to your organization. I also wanted to take a second and talk about the fact that damages. I want to make certain that we touch on what sort of dollars are we attributing to post breach. So your organization has been breached in some fashion, and what's the cleanup costs? And so I want to provide this is a really interesting statistic to show you that 53% of attacks, the cleanup costs associated with those attacks cost a minimum of $500,000 or more. I can, far too many war stories in my own career to talk through and talk about the small businesses that, single mom and pop shops, traditional, very traditional Main Street businesses that have been impacted to the tune of $100,000+, and to the point of almost putting them completely out of business. And you can see here, organizations that may not necessarily be able to afford $500,000 of cleanup costs, make up a predominance of the dollars spent. And these cleanup costs go to both a wide range of areas. In the case of ransomware, as we'll get into, when your data is being held hostage and somebody is demanding Bitcoin or cash to allow you to unencrypt that data, to cyber insurance premiums, to FTC or other regulatory agency fines. All of those things combine into a very, very large potential dollar category around the actual cleanup of a cybersecurity breach. A few more here. I think the other, in my career, I've always seen that cybersecurity is not just a technical problem. As I mentioned at the beginning, it's not a silver bullet. There is no singular technology silver bullet out there. Instead, it is a combination of people, process, and technology, or people, policies, and technologies. And this, I think, was a very interesting statistic because it shows that technology can't take care of everything. So if you're thinking that that the firewall you have or the antivirus that you have is enough to thwart attackers, my ask of you is to think differently about that, and think about the fact that people play into this, as well as the policies that your organizations create and disseminate and educate your staff around, and the technology that then goes to support all of that. But technology alone is not meant to thwart all cybersecurity attacks. And then finally, I wanted to also provide some insurance claim-related information. This is more on the industry side to give you some understanding of trending and awareness. These are claims that have been paid out for cybersecurity-related breaches in 2017 from AIG, the large insurer. And what this tells me is, as you can see, 45% of the types of payouts for a cybersecurity breach by AIG came from the healthcare space. So if your organization's in healthcare, you're not alone. If your organization has been breached in the past and may have had to make a claim, and followed by financial services, followed by professional services, and then you can see if you're in manufacturing or education or retail, you're still not unaffected. There's still, of all claims paid out, still a fairly good number of claims that came through those particular avenues as well. So I want to make certain that we talked about those particular statistics, and as I pivot into the next area about remote workers, when we think about remote work, I think these stats really do help exemplify some of the interesting changes that have occurred, and one of the more transformative changes that have occurred to business over the past 6.5, 7 months, and that is the enablement of a large-scale remote workforce. And as you see here, these particular statistics are actually from early in the pandemic, just mid-March. So, over the course of a 4-day period of time, SAFAR went through the process of asking their particular clientele, are you enabling remote workers? And 67% of those employers indicated they were definitely taking the steps to allow employees to work from home. And you can see these statistics and how pervasive they are through the industry, through the marketplace, and we continue to live with these elements. As business leaders, though, I like to think forward. I like to try to be a few steps ahead, and while these statistics, I think, certainly align to all industries around the country, I think the more interesting set of statistics that are now being presented really go to what happens post-COVID. What happens after we are in a position to potentially resume work? What does that look like? And so I wanted to make certain that I was sharing, this is information by TalentLift, but sourced through Gallup, that I found very interesting, that already the US workforce, the workers that we employ within our organizations, are changing how they're thinking about their work modality. And there's further information within this particular survey and study that I'm not sharing here, but just one is, that one piece of interesting element was that while 59% of workers prefer to continue to work at home, a predominance of those workers prefer this modality, this remote worker modality that we're in. The other interesting statistic I don't show is actually the number of workers, predominant number of workers, over 55% of those workers would actually shift jobs forced to come back into an office. And so the other element that I would want to share here is that actually we see this not just on the employer side, but also on the employee side, as I mentioned, but on the employer side. So 74% of companies are expecting their employees to continue to work from home after we have a vaccine, after the pandemic ends, after we could potentially return to a pre-COVID work modality. And the interesting aspect here is that remote workers are now with us. They are going to continue to be here, and this entire environment that we have built over a very short period of time we're going to continue driving into the future. And so I wanted to take a second with that with that information in mind. I wanted to take a second and have Kat put up a second poll here, if you could, and ask a couple of key questions around remote workforce.
Yep, the second poll is up for everyone.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, so the first question is your company safe from cyber threats? Give me a perspective based on the statistics I've shared. And then, I'm really curious to know, have you enabled remote workers as a result of COVID? And as you can see from the stats that are being collected here, thank you for your responses. There's a predominance here that clearly shows that remote workers are here, remote work modality is here, and it's going to continue to be here, as well as a number of you, hopefully off the stats, but also coming into this particular session, you were already aware that your organization may not necessarily have been safe from the types of threats and viruses and malware that's out there. I'll give everybody just a few seconds here so you can see. I think we're reaching a point where I'm not seeing too many more changes. Good. Well, thank you for your responses there. I'm going to pivot because I'm going to take these other concepts and we're going to roll them into some of the trends and some of the challenges when we get to that particular topic. I want to talk now about data supply chains and move into the third area of this particular section of the presentation, and kind of give some perspective around the concept of data supply chains. And I want to do that by telling you a story. This is a very interesting story. This is from a medium to large enterprise on the larger enterprise side. And my organization, my former company, received a call from their chief security officer. And he was describing an interesting challenge. And this was about 5 years ago, actually. And he proceeded to tell us about a breach of customer record information that occurred, but not in the traditional fashion, not in a traditional way, as you might gather. This was not necessarily an organized cyber criminal activity. This was not a breach in terms of some hackers being able to break on in and steal data or hold that data hostage. Instead, this was actually a breakdown of business process. And what occurred was this. The company in question happened to have a large client database that their marketing team had access to, and their marketing team had utilized for different marketing campaigns. And these were physical mail campaigns, flyers, mailers that would go on out to their loyalty customers, their loyalty database. And what was interesting was that particular database was also being used by some of their customer service reps, and their customer service reps would talk to customers that were calling in, and they would take their information, and they would help process their particular order. And in processing their order, there was one interesting change that had occurred. And that was that the IT department had decided to help transform and help build and improve the actual workflow of the customer service reps. And so they changed the actual data flow, the question flow and the data flow the customer service reps would ask customers as they called in. And the customer service reps were used to the old data flow, the old style, the old ways of doing things. And they hadn't really been trained on the new changes. And so they went through the process of asking the same questions in the same order, but finding different ways, finding different elements, and finding different fields in the database to put that customer information. And in this particular case, the question that was being asked by the customer service reps was, can you please give me your credit card number so I can go ahead and fulfill your order? And the old system had credit card information on the first screen. The new system had it on the second screen. And rather than changing screens, the customer service reps decided that they would find a different field to use to put the customer credit card number in. And they ended up putting it into the address to field. And the address to field was typically used for suite number or apartment number or some other information of that nature, so that the marketing team could then take that data and put it onto labels, put it onto flyers, and put it on and send it on out through the mail. And I suspect you know where I'm going with this, is that customer service reps were putting credit card numbers into address to. And so when the marketing team came in and decided that they were going to send out a very large scale flyer campaign, a print campaign to their loyal customers, they went and did a run against the database. And they decided to start generating out these mailers. And the mailers went out to, the data for the mailers went out to a third party, because the company in question didn't have internal printing and labeling and fulfillment services of that nature. They had outsourced it. So they took the data pull from the database and shared it out with a number of different organizations that were part of the fulfillment process. And come to find out very quickly, when their loyal customers started calling in and asking the question of the customer service reps, why am I seeing my address, and then right below my address is my credit card number, followed by my city, state, and zip. And as you can gather, that actually constitutes a breach of information, and in particular states. And it really, when we saw this and got talking with this particular company, we realized the level of potential exposure to the data supply chain. This was, if the organization, if this particular client had simply had their own internal fulfillment team, it may have been contained. Somebody might have caught this, before the print run went out. But in this particular case, the client went ahead and shared this information out, not just with one particular group, but with multiple groups. And so that data supply chain became extremely compromised, because not only were those external parties then subsequently taking that information and using it for their own purposes in other ways, by the agreement that our client and those service providers had. But as you might gather, they weren't cleaning the data either. So that information was just being propagated through the data supply chain. And so with that in mind, I wanted to kind of set that stage to give you a perspective of that as an avenue. The data supply chain is an avenue of impact. And in leveraging that, I want to contrast the data supply chain and some of its challenges, as we'll see on the next slide, to what I would say is kind of the basic traditional atom-oriented, moving atoms and things across an e-commerce channel. And this is kind of a very basic representation of a real-world supply chain. And there's no data associated with this. We're moving things through this supply chain. Everything from starting off with the raw materials to the actual building of the laptop, and then the distribution of that laptop out to a computer store and ultimately to a customer. This is a very traditional chain. This is a very traditional model of business. As business people, we're very, very used to this. But here we are in a data-driven, data-centric world, and the data supply chain is a very different looking model. And it begins with the concept of data suppliers. Let me turn on my pointer here for purposes of kind of emphasizing. It begins with data suppliers, those organizations that are out aggregating information and finding raw email addresses, raw contact info, buying and aggregating that information and selling it to a data aggregator, who then provides that information out to the service that your organization may be attuned or working within. And your organization may have direct customers, or they may have different aggregators or data partners that you're working with, where you're sharing, buying and selling and sharing for business purposes the data that you have collected and utilized in the fulfillment to your end customers. This interesting data supply chain, time and again, we have seen that there are ineffective defenses for this data supply chain. There are organizations that prevalently send this information back and forth unencrypted. There are organizations that send this information back and forth outside of normal privacy regulatory requirements. So the data supply chain that you establish and the vendors that you're working with may actually be creating not only issues for you, but they also may be issues in terms of brand, but they may be creating issues around liability, legal liability. And so we'll talk about, in the next section, we'll talk more about some of the key elements associated with the data supply chain and some of the things that some of the recommendations we'll make around ensuring that your contracts, for example, are clear and represent what should be in place and what you expect, irrespective of where you are in this model, what you expect your aggregators, your suppliers, your data partners, or even your customers, what you expect of them and what you're doing with their data is all critical. So with remote workers in mind, and the data supply chain kind of as two foundational elements, backed up by all those stats that I showed, I want to now pivot and talk about the top 3 threats. Just the top 3. We're not going to dive deep, but into a wide range of those, because these top 3 threats truly make up the largest amount of both the dollars that are being stolen, as well as the underground market that we'll talk about in a little bit. Those top 3 threats start first and foremost with business email compromise, or BEC. You'll hear me use this term interchangeably, business email compromise and BEC. Currently, again, as of 2019, the stats are all from 2019, that is a $26.2 billion marketplace here just in the US, not on a worldwide basis, just in the US. The second largest is I'm sure everybody's heard of ransomware. We'll go into some of the details if you haven't had a chance to see an example of ransomware. Hopefully you haven't, but if you have, I'm sorry. But for those of you that may not have seen ransomware, we'll get into a couple of examples and talk about some key stats. But I think the key thing that I want to point out here is that we're talking about, again, an $11.5 billion industry that purposely drives around holding data ransom and forcing organizations to pay that ransom in order to get their critical data. And then finally, business process compromise. A business process compromise is kind of the new up and coming area. It is a growing area, and there's only about $3 billion worth of economic impact across the United States, but still, $3 billion is a sizable number. And we'll get into some of the specifics around what business process compromise is. The interesting thing, of course, is that when you add all these up, just within 2019 alone, just across these 3 particular areas, we're talking about a $40+ billion impact to businesses around the United States. And that's a sizable impact, especially when you take into account some of the stats I showed at the beginning. 61% of attacks going against organizations with less than 1,000 employees. So if you consider that an SMB or you consider that an MLE, 61% of this $40 billion is essentially being targeted against and pulled from the operations of those sized companies. The other thing that we typically are seeing is a very interesting model by the criminal activities and criminal underground groups that are actually perpetuating these particular attacks. And that is that there's a very specific set of steps that they go through. And that's represented by the arrow here. The typical approach, as you saw in the stats before, most of the types of attacks that penetrate businesses and result in a compromise and result in a breach are coming through business email compromise, through some sort of business email effort. But once that email has been clicked, once that link has been clicked and malware has been injected or a breach has begun inside your organization, we're seeing most criminal activity pivot to embedding itself and looking for ways to pull through the business processes that you have and the business trust that you've established, pull even more potential revenue out of your organization. So the pivot typically is from business email compromise to business process compromise. And once the criminals have this foothold, then they'll jump into ransomware. Now I have arrows that go from business process compromise, which is the typical approach, but I also have, there's a new trend that's been happening over the past 18 to 24 months. And that new trend is a large result of the youth of criminal organizations that are coming into this particular sphere and this particular business model. And that is that they're pivoting immediately from business email compromise directly to ransomware. They're bypassing what some of the older, more established criminal organizations are doing, which is to actually embed deeply into business processes and look for ways to siphon off dollars without you even knowing it. And we'll talk about some of I have a couple of specific stories to share with you in that regard. But there is this new interesting trend of newer criminal organizations just simply bypassing this particular area, potentially because the amount of effort to the reward may not be as high, and the level of skill set also has to be much higher in order to achieve these kinds of compromises, the business process compromise. Whereas if I get somebody to click on an email and get some level of malware installed or get some level of credentials into your organization, and then immediately start ransoming and encrypting that data that you may have throughout your organization and start holding it hostage, that may result in the ability for me to more quickly and efficiently at a lower cost of goods achieve a level of revenue within your organization or by using your organization. I'm going to deep dive a little bit into each of these particular areas, so that to give you some perspective and again some more statistics and help you kind of understand the challenges that organizations face. And this particular map here is meant to show you across the world. This is not just a U.S. issue. You can see that the predominance of attacks, and these are actually in the thousands, by the way. These are 2.4 million different attacks and 595,000 attacks. But the predominance of attacks are occurring in the United States by far. We're the most data-rich country, and good, bad, or indifferent. Because of the prevalence of type of organization, type of business that we have. Again, come back to the earlier stats. 50% of our workforce and 50% of the companies, actually more than 50% of the companies, but 50% of our workforce work for small businesses. And so the prevalence is to attack those small businesses, find ways in and steal their data, hold it hostage and hold it for ransom. They're doing so, the attackers are doing so by targeting through business email compromise. These efforts are targeting and making use of various kinds of phishing. Spear phishing, as an example, is a method through which an email is forged to look as though it came from a particular executive. In this particular case, most spear phishing attempts are targeting and leveraging the chief financial officer of organizations, whoever's in charge of the financial records. And we'll see is that there's a direct correlation to business email compromise and business process compromise. So if I can establish trust or show, get people to do a wire transfer because the CFO is reaching out under a forged, a bad actor, a hacker or a group of hackers is reaching out as a CFO to somebody who will initiate a wire transfer, is authorized to initiate a wire transfer, then I've not only achieved the process of forging and establishing trust as the CFO, I've also established a revenue stream by that person falling for that particular scheme. We've seen this happen time and again. I'll share with you one particular instance where one organization lost over the course of about 45 days. The CFO actually happened to be on vacation, and the controller was receiving these urgent email requests from the CFO saying, I'm on vacation, but I need you to transfer, do a wire transfer to this particular group because we're in the process of doing merger and acquisition work. And so the controller, unfortunately, just blindly went through, because the email came from the CFO, blindly went through and started transferring direct wire transfers out to these other bank accounts, and to the tune of about $7 million worth of impact. And it wasn't until the CFO got back in town and the controller said, "Hey, I hope everything's going well. I got those emails from you, and all the money's been transferred, but we really haven't seen anybody come through the door, haven't heard anything." That the CFO said, "What wire transfers? What emails?" And they suddenly realized at that point that they had been exposed to not just business email compromise, but also a business process compromise, and the challenges associated with that. So it all comes back to targeting through email particular people, or a shotgun approach where it's a wide range of people that are thrown on out to click on this link, download this cat video. Those are the types of attacks, and those are the types of avenues that are being taken by criminal activity, criminal organizations through business email compromise. The other, as you can see here, terrific growth. Business email compromise has had terrific sustained growth as a business model for the bad guys. In 2015, it was about a $1.2 million market. And in a very short four-year window, it's grown from a $1.2 billion market impacting the United States to $26.2 billion industry. And it's done so because of the prevalence of email being used throughout our communication, our business communications. It is such a trusted avenue, inadvertently trusted avenue, especially when employees, with the level of activity of executive teams and senior management, the level of travel activity over the past few years, line level staff, line level managers may receive an email that looks like it's from the CEO or looks like it's from the CFO, and they take action on it because of that remote level of trust. So if you come back again to what 2020 looks like, one of the key elements here is the prevalence of remote workers. And I would share with you an example where the company I just exited, I built and exited in Phoenix, we grew to about 160 employees. And in exiting the organization, I happened to sell it to Growth Equity out of California. And they are in the process of growing that company further, and they're doing a terrific job with it. However, the pandemic has forced the organization into a mode of remote workers. And as everybody, every division and every department continues to grow, and you think about your own organization and overlay its growth and overlay the number of remote workers you may be hiring, we find ourselves in a position where we may be hiring people who have never met an executive face to face. They may only see them through Zoom. They may only see them through a remote worker modality, and never had a chance to sit down and talk to face to face or have a town hall session, in-person town hall session with an executive. So if they suddenly get an email from an executive saying, "Hey, I need you to go do these things," they may have blind trust as a result of that. And so the remote worker change and that modality change within our businesses may actually and will likely show a significant increase in 2020. Because again, I'm showing you 2019 stats, but it may show a significant increase. And if I were to prognosticate and guess, I would see probably a 30 to 40% increase of this over year. So we will easily crest into the 30 billions, maybe even $40 billion worth of financial impact as a result of business email compromise. I'm going to shift and try to drive, because it's actually the smallest impact. I'm going to shift and quickly jump into business process compromise, and it's a fairly straightforward 4-step process. The criminal organization hacks into your environment. They go through the process of embedding themselves. They watch. They receive email. They intercept emails. They forward emails back and forth. They then test the waters to start seeing how business process works. They find the policies or the operating procedures and operating manuals. They then move through the process of initiating an order or finding ways to move elements, invoicing, PO creation, and receiving or selling or getting dollars out of your organization or getting goods out of your organization. And that's really what it's about. It's about getting either atoms or dollars out of your organization. And in doing so, I think the key element here is the average payout. The average payout of all of these 3 top trends, the average payout for business process compromise is by far the highest. On average, if an organization is able to infiltrate your company or your organization and establish itself and embed itself, and they will then be able to pull, on average, an extra $1 million of resultant opportunity their way until they're discovered. I'm now going to pivot, just for purposes of time, I'm going to pivot into the third key area. And the third key area starts with a question. And that question actually is predicated as we're all good business people. Having started multiple companies through my career, I'm always interested in business propositions. And so in this particular case, I have a business proposition for everybody on this call. And that business proposition is very, very simple. And that is that if in a 4-year period of time, I could come to you and say that I could take dollars you were willing to invest and I could grow it by 350%, would you be interested in doing so? Without knowing what the business proposition is, I know everybody on this session, we're all very ethical people. Integrity is very, very high. But consider for a second the idea that ransomware actually is exactly that kind of business. Ransomware itself has been able to grow 350% over a very short period of time. In a 4-year period of time, it's grown rampantly through the U.S. marketplace. And the challenges. And these challenges face all organizations, all sizes. I know of a very, very large big box retailer that had a significant ransomware event, and they lost multiple sites to ransomware, and then engaged, and tried to do what they could to pay off the ransom, and try to retrieve that data, and they were somewhat successful in doing so. I also know very, very small businesses. Again, this is a prevalent, pervasive issue, and it's one that is running rampant through U.S. industry. But if somebody came to you and said, "I could take your money for every dollar that you invest right now, in 4 years' time, I'm going to be able to give you $350 back," That 350% increase is what's is what's driving a lot of what we're going to get into when we talk about the who and the why. It's actually driving a criminal activity, an organization, organized criminal activity that actually results in business-like operations and business-like models. And as I promised, if you've never seen something like this, count yourself lucky. But this is an example. This is one example of CryptoLocker, which is a prevalent ransomware model. And when CryptoLocker or any of its any ransomware variant reaches a certain point, the criminal actors will activate this kind of screen when you start up your computer. As you can see, it's clear that it states your personal files are encrypted. So not only is this impacting business, but this does certainly bleed over into individual. I said I wasn't going to talk about individuals, but this is one area where it does bleed over into individuals. So all of your files are encrypted. You have a certain period of time. The business, if you think about this in business terms, I'm offering a sale. I have this very exclusive thing that you need, and you need it, but I'm only offering it for a very, very limited period of time. And so in order to do so, you need to send me Bitcoin. You need to pay, and this is an older screen, because you can see Bitcoin, one Bitcoin certainly not worth $291 US anymore. It's worth thousands of US dollars. And so, you would start your computer, you would see something like this pop up, and you have no access to any other records on your computer whatsoever. And that's what ransomware is about. It's about stopping you from being able to get to the key information that you happen to have. That could be your photos, it could be your customer database, it could be your employee database, it could be your financial system. But irrespective, it stops you cold from being able to get to the critical data that you need to be able to run your business. And as a result, what it's asking for is, hey, we'll give you access to that, but you're gonna have to pay us for that. You're gonna have to pay us some money to gain access to that. And that's where the Bitcoin comes into play. So not only do you not have access to your information, now you have to figure out, how do I go get Bitcoin? And what does that look like? How do I go find an exchange and go start that process? I think there are two key things that I would want to share with you. We are seeing ransomware grow as though it was a significant weed. If you think about spring and summer, when weed season happens, and we're out there in our yards, taking care of our yards and tending our lawns, and we're just constantly out there week after week dealing with weeds. That's what ransomware is right now. It's growing at a rate that is significantly higher than anything else. And it's also a very low cost of entry. Well, I'll show you on an upcoming slide that the actual business process is fairly straightforward and can return significant margins to the organizations that are taking this and pushing this into the marketplace. An average attack results in about $84,000 worth of income into the criminal activity, into the criminal organization. So we're through the three top trends, and I want to have you keep in mind some of the key dollars that I talked about. The key dollars being, 26.2 billion for business email, 3 billion for business process, and then 11 billion for ransomware. About $40 billion worth of impact over the course of 2019 brought to U.S. industry. And you may think to yourself, and you may ask yourself, well, now who is doing this? Our typical understanding of who's doing it is really one of two kinds of characters. It's either the single bad actor. They typically either have a mohawk in our minds, or they have a hood. They're the hoodied hacker, which is the huge pop culture perspective being brought on by by television and pop culture and so forth, everything from Mr. Robot to Scorpion and CSI Cyber and so forth. All those various shows that are out there kind of propagate this idea that there's a singular actor involved. Well, the reality is that the people behind the breaches, as you see here with the red stars, they're perpetuated by outsiders, but they're also perpetuated by organized criminal groups. So if you think about the typical the reality being that, take aside nation states and the type of attacks and the type of cyber warfare that's going on between nations, between the United States and China, North Korea, Russia, you name it. The actual criminal actors make up 50% of those are organized into various groups. And while we may consider things like Al Capone and the mafia, that's not necessarily what we're talking about. I'm not trying to represent organized crime in the traditional sense. These are just criminals who have organized under a business concept. And again, 58% of these particular the targets by these criminal organizations are against small businesses. Most of these cyber criminal organized groups have a CEO-like leader. There's actually somebody at the top, but they have gone about the process over the years. Cybercrime itself has gone through a process of professionalization. And now they actually have the ability to, in the dark web, in the deep web, they actually have different marketplaces stood up where if I wanted to go off and target a wide range of different industries or a wide range of different companies, or just even, companies, nonprofits, for-profits that are within a particular zip code, I can actually go to dark websites and order, just like I could anything else. I can order the necessary attacks against a particular zip code and pay money to others to go act on and gather that information and hold those companies hostage, gather up ransoms, and then essentially in a consignment oriented model, get my slice of whatever results come from that. The overarching cybercrime economy, I mentioned before the $40 billion just in the US, but if you think on a global basis, the cybercrime economy generates about $1.5 trillion in 2018 alone. That number just continues to rise and continues to grow because of the various routes, the threats that I mentioned, as well as the fact that remote workers are more and more prevalent. So I can attack the individual, and in attacking the individual, I can now attack the business. And then I can also attack your suppliers and the vendors that you do business with, not just necessarily you directly. I can attack the people within your data supply chain. And in attacking them, gain access to them, gain trust because of the trust that we have together as partners. This is a great example, great graphic to really give you a perspective that, at the end of the day, if you think about, if you take out the terms that I've got here, criminal boss, underboss, and you get down one step below that underboss, campaign manager, suddenly affiliation network, the data reseller, put aside the word stolen. Just think about this from a business perspective. What we're really laying out here is nothing more than a true organized business whose business is criminal activity. So that's what we're up against. That's what we're up against. And that's what we're, it's not the individual Mr. Robot hacker. It's actually the organized, productionized approach to buying and selling the data that can be used against your companies and against your organizations, and doing so in a very methodical, very, very prescriptive way, and doing so with, three key vectors: business email. Once I get a compromise through business email, pivot embed into the business process. Once I've gathered as much information and stolen as much stuff as I can through business process compromise, then go ahead and activate the ransomware. And now I've got the organization right where I want them. I have all of your information. I have control of all of your information. I've probably siphoned off, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars of impact. And now I'm going for that final step and holding your data hostage. And doing so requires specialty. It requires a subject matter expertise. It requires collaboration. And all of that collaboration, all of that networking, all of those campaigns that are driven with a very organized, very principled, business-like approach, but with criminal activity at its core. So why are they doing this? Why are they doing it? Well, I think the key element comes back to the $1.5 trillion. It comes back to basic human greed. And I'm going to show a couple of, kind of give you a quick walk through history of these are not so distinctly different than what we've seen historically happen. But what we have now is we have a globally connected economy, globally connected environment. We now have the resultant pandemic overlaying this, where we have individuals within their homes, outside of the normal corporate sphere, sharing data, exchanging data, and doing so maybe not necessarily with the most adequate approaches and adequate types of security in place. And really, if you think about the three key elements that occur, we can look back in history. We can see that ransomware was back in the 1970s when Patty Hearst was kidnapped, the heiress to the Hearst fortune. That resulted in ransom being paid out. Larceny, the simple theft and coercion and business process compromise, certainly comes back to Al Capone and the entire approach there of just the larceny that he propagated through his network of criminal activity. And then finally, fraud. Really, those are the three key things at the core of this. And if you've never heard of Victor Lustig, I highly encourage you to take a look. Probably one of the early con men. Had the chance to sell the Eiffel Tower not once. He did it once successfully. He actually ended up selling it a second time. Second time wasn't successful though, but he went through the process of counterfeiting and finding ways through fraud. So through business email compromise, finding ways to create dollars through that criminal activity. And again, what does this look like for us? Well, it looks like from 2017 on, we see storefronts, we see cyber and physical integration. We see the factorization, the actual marketplace creation of ransom and criminal activity. All those leading to the next step here of what's next. And I'm going to walk through this next step, the what's next, very quickly, so we can get into some of the key recommendations and really get into the key phase here in the final 15 minutes or so. There are three key things that we see coming next. One, we see that there's going to be cyber IoT, Internet of Things, your Alexas, your Google Homes, not to pick on them necessarily, but those Internet of Things are going to be so prevalent that the ability to hold those elements hostage will take root and take hold. We're seeing a complete modification and process improvement to the criminal activity and the criminal enterprises that are being created. I mentioned that before, as new criminal organizations rise up, they're moving directly from business email compromise to ransomware. They're finding easier access to revenue, finding easier pathways to markets. And then finally, around fraud, I mentioned very early on in this talk around brand jacking, the concept of stealing business storefronts and leveraging website vulnerabilities. I'm going to, in short, I'm going to come through these very quickly here. Cyber hostage, I want to give you a scenario. You're driving in a car, your new car that happens to be internet aware and internet active, and you're driving on the freeway. And moving from Phoenix, I know what it's like to be in 120-degree weather. You're driving along, and suddenly your car stops. The doors lock, and you get a radio voice, a very robotic voice that comes across your car radio that says, "We need you to pay a ransom in order to reactivate your car. We need you to pay a ransom in order to open your car." And it's 120 degrees. And I can assure you, with air conditioning off and the engine off and the inability to get out of a car, you're probably going to be willing to pay in short order whatever they want you to pay, or you're going to be kicking out the glass of your car. And so we see that there's going to be a prevalent trend around attacking the Internet of Things, that are internet aware cars or internet enabled elements in our homes. And that's certainly going to be a big target. The next step is, business changes over time. Business improves. That's what we have to do in order to stay competitive and stay active and provide good value to our customers and to our employees and to our communities. Well, as normal business, as integrity-based businesses are going through this process, so are the criminally-based organizations. And we're finding more and more that they are, again, creating subject matter experts. They're creating their own supply chains of data, and they're working together, bundling services, finding different ways to franchise themselves so that, bad people are us can now go on the dark web and sell franchises and models and business methodologies to different groups around the world to propagate their perspective and propagate their activities. And finally, brand jacking. And I'll leave this, very simple scenario. If you were on social media and you happen to see an ad on a social media site that said, 0.5% 30-year mortgage. So you've never seen something that low before, 0.5%. Click here. And it looks like it's from a reputable firm. I'm not going to pick on any one particular mortgage company versus another, but let's just assume it's a very reputable, very well-known firm that uses social media for its advertising. And you click on that. You click on that link, and you go to a website that looks like and acts like that particular mortgage provider. And you fill out the application and you put all your details in, and suddenly through that business process, through that process of exchanging your individual information to get a new mortgage, there's a window that pops up and says, "Hey, as part of this great opportunity, we need you to upload your tax records. We need you to upload your W-2s. We need you to upload this other critical information." And you do so. It's not just a rep will call you and you'll start working with a mortgage broker or a mortgage rep and go through the process and so forth. You actually go through and you upload that information because of the potential reward of getting a mortgage at such a low rate, especially if it's fixed. Well, at the end of that process, the website then says to you, "We'll call you back in 48 hours with the approvals and we'll move this through title very quickly. You're approved. You'll see you're going to see this is going to be great," so forth. 48 hours goes by and suddenly you don't get a call. You pick up the phone and you call what you thought was the mortgage company that you normally would see an ad from them through social media. And they answer and they say, "We have no records of this. We have no records of you doing this." That's a concept of brand jacking, is leveraging social media, leveraging the need and the communication methods to essentially steal what looks like an active business and compromise that active business and its processes to collect up consumer-related or partner-related data, and in doing so, then be able to leverage that data on the dark web, sell that data on the dark web. We are seeing this become a very, very prevalent trend throughout the cybersecurity marketplace. So I've got a quick third poll, and Kat, if you can throw that up, I'd really appreciate it.
Live.
Great. So first poll really just asks the question, what are you really interested in protecting? I'm curious to find out what people are looking at there. And then, do you feel like your data supply chain is protected? And just for purposes of time, since we've got about 10 minutes left, I'm going to go ahead and, as you're filling out that poll, I'm going to go ahead and jump on into some of the key elements of how you can reduce your risk. I truly feel that reducing your risk is dependent on a number of things. I don't believe in taking a $50,000 hammer to solve a $5 problem. I'm a big believer in very pragmatic, very dependent types of solutions based upon the size of your company, the market you serve, the maturity of your company. Don't pay $50,000 to solve a $5 problem. Pay 50 cents to do so. Do so in a fiscally responsible, pragmatic way. However, that said, irrespective of size of company, if you are looking to really propagate a high degree of maturity and a high degree of risk reduction to your organization by as much as 50%, I'm sorry, 85%, I would ask you to keep these 4 things in mind. People, this is a simple mnemonic, people, passwords, and patches. So I used to go out into the market and speak and say, just remember the 3 Ps, people, passwords, and patches. But I've added, as a result of remote workers and as a result of ransomware and the prevalence of some of these other threats, I've added in backups. Irrespective of the size of company you happen to be, if you can make certain that your people are aware that your passwords are strong, or if you can eliminate passwords altogether, that may be an option. And then more than anything else, patch your systems. Most ransomware, most avenues of attack, most business email compromise, if somebody clicks on a link, the attackers are taking advantage of an unpatched or a poorly patched environment. And when you think about patching, please don't just think about your operating system, your Windows or Mac OS or Linux. Think about Adobe. Think about Java. Think about the other key supporting technologies that you use, your applications. Consider patching those. The services that you provide. If you're providing web services or design services, or you're providing other related services to customers, make certain that you're patching those particular environments and use that as a banner of trust with your customers, that you take cybersecurity seriously. You do patch your systems. And then ultimately, even though it's kind of very, very elemental, very basic, backups. Ensure that you've got good, strong backups. I think the important thing is understanding your maturity, your cybersecurity maturity. I would impress that most industries, most organizations, most groups that I talk to throughout my career are somewhere, irrespective of industry, irrespective of size, they're typically about a 0 to 2. And my push, my wish, and my hope is that as an organization, you take the opportunity to look at what you have, look at how you can mature through the items I just showed you, how you can mature those so that you can get to a point where you're somewhere above a 1 to a 2, moving to a 3. I'd love to have all industries, all businesses around the US be at 3s or above. But I'm also pragmatic to know that we all have businesses to run. So I'm asking, think about the idea that you have more than just a firewall and antivirus. That you actually have some level of oversight to what your compliance requirements are. You have some level of oversight of security awareness. What do your employees know? Some level of control around the not having everybody share the same password or share the same user ID. That there are strengthened long passwords and diverse passwords, and in doing so, advance the maturity of your organization. I'm going to pivot off these people, passwords, patches, and backups. If you're a medium to large enterprise, an MLE, I'm going to ask you to add a couple of key elements, and that is policies. Policies go directly to your people. They help provide governance and support to your people to help them understand what's important. They're critical, just as critical as your corporate mission, corporate vision, and the things that make your companies or organizations what they are. They help represent and help provide that guidance. They're also some of the, if there is a need for any sort of internal action against an employee, and the employee is not aware of those policies, they can claim that they weren't made aware, they didn't sign anything, and as a result, they did not know that those actions, if they were nefarious or otherwise, would cause harm and were restricted by your organization. Be aware of your regulations. As companies increase in size, they become larger and larger targets for regulators to come in and auditors to come in and say, hey, we've discovered that you don't have these whatever those things are, these kinds of things in place around, let's say, health information or credit card information, and you're not protecting the data that's been entrusted to you correctly, and understanding those regulations and what controls and what costs are associated with them, can help you avoid fines and help you avoid overall risk. And then the other thing is constantly be improving. Just like the bad guys, as I mentioned before, the bad guys are looking at continually improving their business and continually improving their business models. Improve your cybersecurity. Stay abreast of what's out there from a trend perspective. Stay aware and keep your people and keep your systems patched, and keep your people aware, and ultimately move forward with what's happening and be aware of what's happening out there in the market. A couple of last key elements. Understand your cyber risk profile. Understanding that and understanding what's the likelihood of a security breach? How would your organization respond to a breach? Where are some of the key gaps in your maturity, and how do you plug those? Are there tactical needs to plug them, or are they strategic elements? Set up a heat map. Give yourself a dashboard. Give yourself a timeline and a roadmap to build towards. Don't expect to do all of this in one day. Again, it's a process. It takes time. Change is difficult, like I said at the very beginning. And it's going to take time to bring about change and time to bring about the kind of maturity that you need in order to not be a victim of any of the types of threats I mentioned. And then ultimately, you want to get yourself into a program, a cyber hygiene program, where this process of discovery and learning and knowledge helps you move into being able to remediate or remove those particular risks. Doing so by understanding the vulnerabilities that your organization may have technically, and then patching against those vulnerabilities is critical. Configuring your systems, making certain that systems aren't open and unpatched as they face the internet. Moving into people, ensure that your people are aware that passwords are expected to be a certain length. They're supposed to be managed and routinely changed and routinely handled appropriately and not shared. And then put those things, codify those with policies, and educate your staff on the types of risks. Use the information I've shared with you today, the types of stats, the types of avenues of attack, the types of elements that might be impacting your organization, so that ultimately you don't end up having to deal with a ransomware or process compromise or an email compromise. And then final poll, if we can, if Kat can throw those up for me.
Yep, it's live.
Excellent, thank you. So I'm really curious to know if you wouldn't mind sharing what you think your cyber maturity happens to look like, and then do you measure regularly? I'd love to have that detail, and I think it would be helpful for everybody to have that if there's share that out with the rest of your peers on this. In the final minute that we've got here, I wanted to share out some checklists and questions. Kat, I do believe, remind me, we're going to be making, we're recording this and making it available. And if we're not, please, I have my email at the end of this. If you want to write it down, capture it, I'm happy to share these slides with you and provide these on out. But these are the types of questions I would be asking, irrespective of size of company. Your answers will differ, but keep these in mind, and these kinds of questions and the answers that they bring about will help you reduce your organization's risks. And then final recommendations based upon the size, maturity, and complexity of your business. These are some of the vendors technically that are out there from a technology standpoint. Again, it's not all about technology, but I get asked far too often, who should we implement? You know, which technology should we look at? And so I went ahead and provided some of those. These are my professional recommendations. These are not endorsed by Boise State. And then I also added one final element. We didn't get a chance to talk about it too much, but cyber insurance. I highly recommend, irrespective of size of company, that you look into getting a cyber insurance policy. It will help you with everything from a breach to cost containment, clean up data protection services for the impacted organizations or people, and is certainly one area where you can help reduce your risk or offset your risk. One final plug about the Boise State online certificate for cybersecurity readiness and cybersecurity understanding. My email is right there. Don't hesitate, please reach out. Thank you very much for the time. I hope this has been helpful. And certainly if there are any questions, I can go into a coffee talk or other area if need be.
Great. Thank you so much, Ed. I just want to reiterate, this is recorded, so it will be shared out, I believe, August or October 1st. Everyone will get a copy of that. So yes, please feel free if you have any questions to reach out. You can also reach out through the messaging option, which is right next to your profile. There's a little envelope, so you can reach out to Ed that way as well. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been a very informational and a great talk.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful session and enjoy the conference.